Okay, all right, well now, turning to our feature articles this week, we return to a topic that's proven very popular with you, our readers, over the past couple of weeks, conflict minerals. The business case for a long-term conflict mineral program, an article by Sonal Sinha, ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And in the piece, Sinha continues her call for a process-oriented approach to compliance to Section 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. This specific section of the Act addresses the requirement that suppliers and manufacturers must disclose whether or not any tungsten, tin, tantalum, and or gold found in their products were mined in support of wars, genocide, or other conflicts in regions such as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, this is a rather complicated issue with many facets, so to help us understand what it all means, we're now going to be joined by the author of this piece, Sonal Sinha of MetricStream. Sonal, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for all the good work you've done to raise this issue. I think it's good for us all to know about and be aware of it. Those of us in quality assurance certainly deal with lengthy supply chains, and we need to know what's going on with those supply chains. So let's jump right into it. Now, Dodd-Frank requires disclosure of conflict mineral usage, but it doesn't really dictate how manufacturers must comply to that. So in your experience in working with this, how have you seen organizations approach compliance?
That's a great question. So as you rightly mentioned, Dodd-Frank has provided us what the end goal should be or would look like, but hasn't really given us a path of how companies should be getting there. So what I'm seeing in the industry is that there are two basic approaches to conflict minerals compliance. One I would term as a short-term approach, and the other I would term as a more long-term and sustainable approach. So a lot of organizations are taking, one or the other approaches because most companies, by now realize that they have to comply with this requirement if they are subject to it, and have started taking steps in order to do that. So one of the first things that organizations are doing is they're looking at their current supply chain. They're trying to get and analyze and get an inventory of which products are in scope, what products might potentially contain these 3 TG items, and then trying to identify which suppliers are supplying them with those products. And this, as you probably might already imagine, can be a very, very complicated affair. As we are living in a global economy, we have very complex supply chains. So a lot of organizations have started using standard templates. The EICC has a good version. The EICC JESI template is one of the versions that's very popularly used. So they're using these templates to reach out to the suppliers and gather that information, through very simple surveys on, do you contain conflict minerals? If yes, where are you getting them from? Do you know the smelters you're getting them from, etc. So the survey approach is what we're seeing very commonly. Another approach, which is more of a long-term and a sustainable approach, is one that drives down into the bill of materials and the product level to actually identify and be able to track down and trace the supply chain and the components in the supply chain. So this involves a lot of integration with systems, integration with databases, being able to perform rules and validations in order to better understand and get more solid information on the status of their compliance with conflict minerals.
And many of us, of course, in our industry, we understand the benefits of long-term systems approach to the strategic approaches to this. But you term it a myopic approach. The short-term approach, you call it in your piece a myopic approach. Do you think there's a benefit to that? I mean, people are doing that, obviously. They're just kind of firefighting, I think, to try to deal with this by, I think it's May 31st, is that correct? When 2014, when this is due, I believe.
2014,
yeah.
Right.
So why would anyone take a short-term approach? Is there a benefit to that in any way that you can see?
Well, that's a great question that you ask. And one of the reasons why some organizations are taking a short-term approach is they're just not sure where this is going to lead to in the next few months, whether the direction that the industry is going in might change, whether there might be additional changes in the law. So we're not really just sure how this is playing around. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is that it can get very expensive, very, very quickly to dive down into supply chains, especially for organizations who have traditionally not done so. So the expense factor is one large one. So it's a cost benefit analysis, and a lot of companies are just honestly struggling trying to come up with an ROI on this compliance initiative.
We've seen it in federal courts, and we've seen this reported on as well, that there's been some pushback from organizations and those in federal courts that are saying that being forced to disclose their usage of such conflict minerals violates First Amendment rights protecting the freedom of speech. So what would you say about that? Do you think that there should be protections that people should not have to disclose, or is this a bigger issue than that?
Right. This is a very interesting question you ask, Dirk and Mike. So yes, there have been petitions that have been arguing that it's a First Amendment issue over here that we're dealing with, that it's burdensome and it's stigmatic. So, I think there are a lot of, arguments that could be made on either sides of the fence. But when you take a step back and think about the intent and what the SEC was trying to achieve with the conflict minerals, with the Dodd-Frank requirement, what most companies, and MetricStream has done a survey called Thrive on Risk, and what we found is majority of respondents in that survey have identified that although they feel that this might not be very effective, right off the bat, and there might not be an immediate impact on the situation in the DRC or the covered countries, we are taking steps, so the SEC is taking steps in the right direction. So I think we're looking at something that's beyond just compliance, and we're going into this area of corporate social responsibility where the government is basically stepping in and trying to tell companies to do the right thing. So a lot of organizations are taking advantage of that and going above and beyond and using this as a leverage and a lever to then expand their corporate social responsibility program and reach out to their customers and let them know that we're not just are we complying, we're doing the right thing, and we're taking the right steps for world peace, world security, and we're all working towards the same common goal.
Sonal, just briefly as we wrap up here, where do we go from here? How can we expect the government to increasingly dictate transparency in sourcing and supplier relationships?
It's a very interesting question. And yes, I feel that where we're going from here is the number of regulations, types of regulations, especially as it pertains to the transparency in supply chains, is going to continue to increase. And, as a matter of fact, we've already been seeing that. When you look at the, as an example, the California Transparency in Supply Chain Act, so Senate Bill 657, you look at what's happening with FDA, with industries such as food, pharmaceuticals. We've already been seeing that the government is coming in and saying, you got to know what your supply chain is. You got to know where you're getting your products and what you're putting into them. Because at the end of the day, the customers have a right to know what they're buying. So I think we will see many more of these type of regulations. I think it's not going to stop, but when you take a step back and look at what organizations have to do in order to comply with, either conflict minerals or any other of these type of regulations, it boils down to very simply understanding and taking control of their supply chain.
Okay. Sonal, we actually have a question from one of our viewers right here, if we can pop that up, Christopher.
Sure.
What about raw materials? I have done the survey. How can I ensure what I'm getting from my suppliers?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are various different ways to perform this level of due diligence. Some of them, can be very traditionally the audits. So one can leverage their internal audit team or their third-party auditors that organizations currently use to perform a variety of other audits to then add conflict minerals as part of their audit scope. So going back to the factories or the manufacturing facilities to understand and perhaps test a few items and confirm that what they are getting is indeed the right materials. So auditing is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, of course, the surveys and the attestations that go above and beyond just the plain questionnaires. So that's another approach that I think organizations can take. And we're seeing a lot of that in the due diligence efforts. And a third approach that also we're seeing in the industry is sharing of information, which is sometimes more easily said than done. But the ability to be able to share some of the information or some information about the materials and then compare. If it's the same supplier that's providing the information, then potentially the materials might be very similar. So the ability to share, use industry standards, reach out in the industry, and be able to gather that information and talk to your colleagues, I think is very important.
Great. Well, thank you, Sonal. Great information as always from you and the team at MetricStream. Thank you for providing that to us. And anyone else out there have questions, please write us at qdlqualitydigest.com, and we'll make sure we forward them on to Sonal after the show and get you an answer. So, Sonal, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch up to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Sonal. Okay, well, if you have